or both of your parents die. What do you do when such kind of a shift happens? Most of us, when we were coming here in Form 1, we have very big dreams. I wanted to be a doctor. There are those who wanted to be lawyers. There are those who wanted to be pilots. And as you move along your academic journey, you realize when you're in Form 3, you're getting a B+, a C+, and then you realize that being a doctor, kidogo, may not work. What do you do when a shift happens? There are some of us, I know we are living in a complicated generation. We begin dating early. So some of us here have girlfriends already, and then you get a letter from nowhere that it has come to an end. And then you realize that now I am alone. What do you do with yourself in such kind of a shift? There are some of us that there are things that we had planned for our lives. There are things that we thought we would do, and then you realize because of the stages that we go through, when you get into adolescence, things are just complicated. Even yourself, you don't understand what is happening. And then you realize that there is a paradigm shift. What do you do with yourself? I've come to remind you that as you live this life, be much aware that shifts happen. Things will not always happen like you have planned. You may plan to go right, and you realize all of a sudden that you're going left. What do you do with this left that you never planned for, that has come with a new package, unlike the package that you had for right? This reminds me of a story in the book of 2 Samuel. Let's go to the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 9. 2 Samuel chapter 9 talks about now the reign of King David. We know about the kings of Israel, and the first king of Israel was called? The first king of Israel? Thank you so much. Now the first king of Israel was called Saul. Now Saul was called, the nation of Israel rather, was led by God. And so God would talk through his prophets to raise kings for his children. And so Saul was the first king of Israel. God made him a king, and along the way when he was ruling the nation of Israel, he did not please God. And so God rejected Saul. And God went ahead and sent Samuel to go and anoint David. And so Saul was reigning while David had been anointed to be the next king of Israel. Life wasn't easy for David because Saul knew what it meant to see such a young, brilliant man coming up, knowing that there is possibility of him taking over as a king. Just like in our society today, there are times when you try to rise up, and when they realize that you're becoming a threat, then you get dehoned and you get below the carpet. And so Saul reigned in Israel, and Saul had a son who was called Jonathan. And Jonathan was a very good friend of David. Remember, according to how it was supposed to be, when a king dies, it was the son who was to take over to be the next king. And then David has been anointed, and David finds himself in the palace, and he became a friend of Jonathan, who was supposed to be the next king of Israel, according to the way things were done in Israel. Now David are friends with Jonathan. Saul has been rejected, and God has anointed David. Now in the course of life, Saul and his son Jonathan goes to war after the father had been rejected, and they both die. Now God gives an order through his prophet that everybody in the house of Saul must be killed. Because if anyone would have survived, then they would fight David, being the king of Israel. And so God gives an order that everyone in the household of Saul were supposed to be killed. Now in the event of this incident, the son of Saul, who was called Jonathan, had a small son called Mephibosheth. Now the house help, or the nurse who was taking care of her, was trying to run away to save the life of the young one from being killed. And then in the event, this boy fell down and was crippled on both legs when shift happens. You know, in this life, you may begin a journey with 2 eyes, and then all of a sudden you discover you're blind. You may begin in good health and you realize that things have changed. And God is reminding us from the book that we read, the book of Romans chapter 8, verse 28, that I know, Paul is saying, I know that all things work together for good. Now when he talks about I know, now anytime you say that I know, It is some level of confidence that confirms that in the past, there is a way that things have happened that gives you the confidence to talk about the future without question. And so Paul is saying that I have confirmed from how God has led me that all things work together for good. Now in the book of 2 Samuel chapter 9, David becomes a king. It was a time that things were not very easy in Israel. And at this time now, David finds a bit of peace and is seated in his house and is reflecting. And then he remembers the relationship that was between him and Jonathan, the son of Saul. And the Bible reads in verse 1, and David said, is there yet any that is left of the house of Saul, that I may shew him kindness for Jonathan's sake? When someone asks, is there any yet left? Now that reminds you of how tough it was. You know, when you go to the battle, and then someone asks, really, is there anyone left? It means that that person may have been present in the battle, and the way things happen, it is not possible that someone may have survived. And so David is asking that could there be a possibility that is there someone that remained in the household of Saul? I know Saul had been rejected by God, but there is a covenant that David made with his friend Jonathan, and he's saying that if there is anyone that is left in the household of Saul, then I want to show him kindness. I don't want you to forget that Mephibosheth was supposed to be a prince, but now he is a lame man who is out of the palace, and you're going to get where Mephibosheth is now staying because of the shift of life. There are things that may happen in our lives that when you look back, you find that things are not the way they used to be in the past. Maybe you had your parents and you are living in a very good place, and now because you do not have them, you look at the life you're living and you feel like my life is coming to an end. And I want to remind you, young people, that God is aware. God understands the shifts, and all things work together for good. Many people take away their lives because of the shifts of life. There are those who get into depression. There are those who get so stressed that those even opt to kill themselves because of shifts of life. And I want to remind us that when shifts happen, it is always for our own good. And so a response is given to David in verse 2. And it says, and there was of the household of Saul a servant whose name was Ziba. And when they had called a man to David, the king said unto him, art thou Ziba? And he said, thy servant is he. Verse 3, and the king said, is there not yet any of the house of Saul, that I may shew the kindness of God unto him? And Ziba said unto the king, Jonathan hath yet a son, which is lame on his feet. The question that David asked was so simple. That is there anyone that is left in the household of Saul? And then Ziba, who was serving during the reign of Saul in the household of Saul, is brought to the king to give a response to that answer. And the reason why they bring Ziba forth, you know, if they knew that there was no one who was left, they would have just told the king that there is no one left. But they decided to call Ziba to tell the king what is really happening, because they thought that the king is just playing games because he wants to protect his territory. He's looking if there is any threat remaining so that he may kill that person. And so when Ziba comes, he tells the king that there is someone, a son of Jonathan, but is lame on both feet. Sometimes when shifts happen in our lives, we may get titles that are not ours. Now this is a prince, but when a prince is being defined, then the only title that a prince can be given is that he's lame on both feet. You can be lame on both feet even in your class. You came to this school with the higher marks from primary, and if that would be converted, maybe it was an A. And then now in your class, you are the one who is getting a C. And so you are called a, I don't want to say that. But of course you know what it means to be at the bottom. And so when you look at that, you get a title that may really not define who you are, but because you have allowed the shift to shape you, you get to what you are not supposed to be. There are most of us here who are getting grades that are not meant for them because you have allowed the shifts of life to determine how or who you become today. But I want to remind you that if you are